Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the concluding speaker in our semester-long discussion on race in America. I am Professor Lindsay Hoffman. I'm the director of the National Agenda Series and associate director for the Center for Political Communication. The CPC, along with the College of Arts and Sciences, the Center for the Study of Diversity, and the Office of the Provost, as well as the William P. Frank Foundation, is a proud supporter of all the events this semester. We've been tackling tough issues surrounding the topic of race and racism this semester at a time when racial tensions on campus nationwide are flaring. We've heard from two of the most prominent faces in the Black Lives Matter movement, Neda Elzy and DeRay McKesson, who talked to us about white privilege and their 10-point plan to improve police relations with their communities, called Campaign Zero. We've heard from an Iranian-American stand-up comedian who told us how he uses humor to diffuse racial tension. We also listened to a veteran CBS News correspondent who recalled marching alongside civil rights activists in Selma 50 years ago this year. We heard from political cartoonist Keith Knight, who tackles issues of police brutality through cartoons, and a UD alum, Peter Bailey, who recounted his time at UD as a Black student from the US Virgin Islands. You can see videos of all of these speakers at udel.edu/national agenda. This semester, there have been a number of incidents that suggest a real need to have an open dialogue about race on this campus and others. Tonight's event is free and open to the public, like all National Agenda events. I encourage audience participation from both the audience here in Mitchell Hall as well as via social media. Just tweet at the account at UD Race in America, and you can join the discussion. That's at UD Race in America, and your tweet could make it into the conversation tonight. It should be said, though, that along with the candidness and sincerity, civil and respectful dialogue is expected. So, as I've said all semester, and this is the last time I'll be saying it this semester, if you wouldn't stand up and say it in public, don't tweet it. And here in Mitchell Hall, look around you. Know that we are all here to get a better understanding of race in America and on this campus. Be candid, but also be courteous. So tonight, Redditt Hudson is a founder of the National Coalition of Law Enforcement Officers for Justice, Reform, and Accountability. This coalition includes current and former police officers from around the country who are committed to challenging the institutional racism that is at the foundation of our criminal justice system and is found in police culture throughout America. He's also the board chair for the St. Louis, Missouri-based Ethics Project, an organization focused on addressing problems in America's prison industry, beginning with ending the school-to-prison pipeline. Mr. Hudson was racial justice manager and then program associate for the American Civil Liberties Union of Eastern Missouri. And he's also a former St. Louis police officer. He left the force in 1999 to focus on addressing systematic problems in the criminal justice system, abused police authority, and improving the police-community relationship. He is the author of the critical investigative report, Suffering in Silence, which cataloged human rights abuses in St. Louis jails, and which has led to several formal actions to address the conditions in them. Please join me in welcoming Redditt Hudson to the University of Delaware.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. Everybody can hear me pretty good? Great. Man, they've been running me ragged today, I'm gonna tell you. I've had quite the day, and I'm getting my second win now, and I'm very glad to be here with you to talk about race in America, and more importantly, for me, to talk about police-community relations and some of the dynamics that we've seen relative to race and police in the United States in the last 18, 24 months. I think it's important, and I'm very glad to have this opportunity to speak to you and potentially, if they decide to run any part of this on C-SPAN, the country from a very different perspective from law enforcement. And my colleagues who also share a law enforcement background, a lot of times in the mainstream presentation of police points of view you don't hear from officers who understand the history of policing in America and the relationship between police and the black communities that they serve in urban core communities across this country. So just to tell you a little bit about who I am before I get started. My name is Redditt Hudson. I'm a lot of things. I'm a father, I'm a son, former St. Louis University basketball player, former racial justice manager at the ACLU, currently regional field organizer for the NAACP, Region 4 National NAACP, although I'm not here in that capacity. I'm speaking strictly in the capacity of my position as co-founder of the NCLEOJ and the board chair of the Ethics Project. And I'm here to talk to you tonight as candidly as I can in a space in our history where your generation, and I'm talking to the college students here, and the organizers on this campus and around the country, have put us in a position to affect real change, and this has to happen. So to lay the foundation for you, I want to share some things with you about my experiences when I was on the department, and then I'll get to my remarks. To give you a sense, a foundational sense of some of what this movement that you've seen grow from Ferguson all the way around the world has been vilified wrongfully in so many corners is really about. So early in my career, I was working with an officer, female officer. And this officer happened to be a white female officer. However, I will tell you, there's not only white officers that abuse their authority. You have black officers that do it, Asian officers that do it, Hispanic officers. The issue is the abuse of authority and where it takes place, which is consistently in black and brown communities and sometimes in poor white communities across this country. But I was working with this officer one day early in my career, and we got a call. And it was a call for an officer in need of aid. Now, an officer in need of aid call, for anybody who's in law enforcement in the room, or anybody who knows law enforcement officers, officer in need of aid call is a very serious call. It means all officers in the geographical range of this call, in earshot of this call, stop whatever you're doing and expedite to the officer's location who put out the aid call. He or she is in trouble. Serious trouble, could be. So this officer put out an aid call. He was in a foot pursuit, chasing a suspect in an armed robbery. And he was running, and he was giving his coordinates, calling out where he was. The aid call comes out, we expedite to his location, and we get there first. And we see the officer who put the aid call out. We don't see a suspect. We see the officer, and he's bent over like this, winded, breathing hard. We get out of the car, we go up to the officer, and the female officer asks him, "What happened? Are you okay? Are you all right?" "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm all right." He's breathing hard. "Well, where'd he go? Did you see where the guy went? Where'd he go?" Now, we were on a street called Ashland in North St. Louis, Missouri. That is the black side of St. Louis, Missouri. And on Ashland, there's a long block of houses, long block. And he's bent over like this. She asked him where the guy went, and he did like this. I think he went in that house. He picked a house at random. We go up to the house, me and the female officer. We get to the door. She's banging on the door. She had her mag light, flashlight, big black flashlight, hitting the door as hard as she could. Bam, bam, bam. "Open this door, open this." I'm not gonna use the language. "This MFing door. We're coming in here, we know somebody's in here, and we're coming in here to bring you out." We don't know if anybody's in the house or not. But from the back of the house, with the ruckus that we've created in the front of it, we see a shape begin to approach the door. Wooden door, glass in the center, and it's moving about this speed right here. Slowly getting to the door. The door opens, cracked. Standing in the door is a kid about 19 years old, African American. And I'm standing there with this female officer. Now, mind you, I'm 6'8". I'm out of shape right now. But at that time, I was working out every day. I was about 265, 270, single-digit body fat. I had on a short sleeve shirt that was a size medium. And it was that small on purpose, so I could just look like I was just busting out of it. He opens the door, and he looks, and he says, "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. I live here. I've lived here all my life. Everybody on this block knows our family. They know me. I'm here by myself right now. My family's not here, but you got the wrong house." And I guess that was the wrong answer. Because as soon as he got those words out of his mouth, she grabbed him by his throat, snatched him out of that doorway, and took him to the edge of the porch that we were on. And in North St. Louis, the porches are elevated on some blocks. They sit up real high. If you go over the edge of it, you're not just gonna fall from here to that floor. You'll fall maybe 10 feet. She had him by his throat over the edge of that porch. Bam! She cracked him right in the face. And I'm looking at this, and if somebody hits you like that, and I've shared this incident 100 times, and I always say, if somebody hits you like that, generally speaking, you're gonna do one or two things. You're gonna put up your hands and try to block something else that may be coming at you, or you may offer up some discouragement for that kind of behavior. But given that this is a police officer, that's not likely. He threw his hands up. I don't know if she thought he was trying to engage or what, but she hit him again. Bow to the face, bow to the groin. She's hurting him, man, and it's happening. I'm telling it slow, but it's happening fast. So I see this, and at this point, I go over, if you can picture this, and grab the uniformed officer in my uniform and get her off of this guy and take her to one side of the porch, lead her over there. But I told you, it was an officer in need of aid call that went out, which means every officer in the area expedite to this location. He had canceled the aid call, which slowed them down some, but didn't slow them down completely, because if you understand police work and police culture, you know people want to see what the aid call was about. So they came anyway. Here come the rest of the officers. Now up the steps of the porch that we're on comes a black officer, black male officer. He comes up the steps, some other officers gather on the front of the house, and he looks at me, looks at the veteran officer that I had in the corner. He goes over to her, "What's going on? What happened? What's going on here?" She points at the guy who's still laying where she left him on the ledge of the porch and said, "That SOB so-and-so, he assaulted me and tried to interfere with what I was trying to do." Black officer said, "Oh yeah?" He goes over to the guy and said, "Man, get up." Kid looked up at him and said, "Man, you see I can't get up." And the officer said, "Man, get the fill in the blank up." And the kid said, "Man, you see I can't get up." He said, "Man, I told you to." And he grabbed him in his shirt, picked him up, bam, and slammed him into the house so that his face was against the house and his hands are behind his back. And he cuffed him up. And he cuffed him, and the kid is still leaning against the house. And he said, "Now get down this porch and get in that car, because I'm taking you in for assault on the officer and interfering with an arrest." And the kid was leaning on the house, looking at him. And he said, "Man, I'll never forget the look in his eyes. It was a mix of anger, hurt, surprise, fear, all of that. Because he was looking at this brother in front of him thinking, why are you doing this to me?" And he said it one last time. He said, "Man, you see I can't go." The officer said, "Oh no." He dropped down and grabbed this kid by his ankle, boom, pulled up like that. Now, if you got your hands bound behind your back and can't move them, and somebody grabs you by your ankles and pulls up as hard as they can towards this ceiling, what do you think happens? You hit your head pretty hard, don't you? And he did. And he drug him down that porch and down the front of that yard and threw him in the car. And we got back to the station, and we're all in the sergeant's room, and we all get into it. First, the female officer says to me, "Redditt Hudson, let me tell you something. If you ever interfere with me again while I'm doing police work," that's how she characterized what she had done, police work, "I'll never ride with you again." I'm thinking that's already a pretty damn good idea. I'm with that. The other officer, me and him go back and forth a little bit. The sergeant comes in and hears what's going on, squashes the whole thing. "Look, we got work to do. We don't have time for this." Puts us all back in service. And we all went back in service. And that was that. What always bothered me about that encounter, what always has stayed with me to this very day, was the reason the kid kept telling the officer that, "You see that I can't go. You see I can't go." The reason he was saying that was because when he first came to the door and saw me and the other officer standing there, and he cracked that door open, he was standing there on crutches. She snatched him off his crutches to do that to him. And nobody was in the house, and it was his home, and he was in violation of no law. No law. I got one more for you to set the foundation, and then we'll talk. Anthony Collins, young kid, 21, 22 at the time, 2006, comes to us, is brought to our attention, this is when I was at the ACLU, about an assault committed on him by police officers in St. Louis at a traffic stop, one of those checkpoint situations where they set up a checkpoint and every car that comes through has to stop. And he's at the checkpoint one night and he stops for the officer, but the officer is at a distance and he can't understand at some point what the officer is directing him to do or what he wants him to do. And so he gets out of his car to find out more about what he needs to do because he has somewhere to be. He has somewhere to be. He gets out of the car. The officer says, "Get back in the blank and blanking car." And because he has somewhere he urgently needs to be, he approached the officer anyway in an attempt to explain that and find out what it is he needs to do so that he can move through the checkpoint. Instead of offering him explanation for his simple act of non-compliance, which these days can get you killed, the officer proceeds to assault him physically. He maces him, chokes him up with that mace, eyes burning, and they're getting ready to arrest him for assault on an officer again or resisting arrest. Anytime the police beat you up, they charge you with resisting arrest. I don't know if you know that or not. Anthony pleads his case. And at some point, one of the supervising officers arrives and a decision is made to finally let Anthony get medical attention, which they initially denied to him, and to release him. This was largely due to the fact that at some point they realized that the assault that the officer committed on Anthony had caused him to miss his flight back to Iraq for his second tour of duty in the United States Army. I interviewed Anthony at length, and to hear Anthony, this black kid, this soldier, describe to me how he felt that he had no rights here in the United States, that anyone were bound to recognize, how he had always felt this way because the police had always treated him this way and his family this way, including his mother, was disappointing to say the least. These kinds of experiences are part of the daily lived reality of black people everywhere in this country, particularly in the urban cores of America. And you need to fully understand that when you see Black Lives Matter, This is what they're talking about. That's not the only thing they're talking about, but they're talking about the real lived experiences of people, and they are tired. We are tired. This is generations old. Fathers and sons, mothers and daughters have all experienced this, going back to who knows when, and there's been zero accountability for any of it, because as police officers, we always can fall back on that narrative of heroism, sacrifice, risk. Some of the favorite words of many of the most public police apologists that you see all the time in the mainstream media. People like Harry Hoke, former New York City detective, the town crier of police apologists, people that justify anything that the police will do on the street. You know, this is where we are. And what about the more serious cases we've seen, where we have seen absolutely no accountability for officers that violate our human rights and civil liberties? Eric Garner, murdered in front of us, make no mistake, murdered on the street as he pleaded for his life by an officer using an illegal chokehold that's barred by his own department's policy. And he willfully does this with zero expectation that him and his cohorts are going to be held accountable. In fact, in the aftermath of it, you get a police union boss, Pat Lynch, New York City Police Union president, chin up, chest out, not only justifying this murder, but calling on his officers to turn their backs on the mayor of New York, Mayor de Blasio, for having the nerve to describe the real lived experience of him and his family when he talks to his biracial kids about how to deal with the police. Lynch would do better to have his officers stop turning their backs on our human rights and the protections of the Constitution that extend to all of the citizens that they serve. He would do much better in that regard. Sandra Bland, who encounters an officer and rightfully is indignant at a nonsense stop, and who correctly asserts the rights that do extend to her under the Constitution, only to be met with the contempt of this officer for having the nerve as a black woman to assert her rights to him. He's asking her he's directing her to put out a cigarette after the summons that he was issuing her is issued. Their interaction is done. If I'm the police and I'm on the street with you, and you have received a summons from me and we've conducted our business, I'm out. I'm back to my car. I'm not standing there saying, and by the way, I want you to put that cigarette out. And if you don't put it out, somehow we escalate to the point where I'm telling you I'm going to light you up. I'm going to hit you with this 50,000 votes because I don't like your attitude. We have got to come to a place where officers see the inherent dignity and value of everyone and every life, on the people that they serve in their communities. Tamir Rice, I just want to go through a few, and the reason I'm doing this is very specific, because we do have some media coverage here, and I think it's important, if this goes out nationally, for people to hear a different perspective from law enforcement, one that acknowledges the realities of our ugly history when it comes to race and racism and institutional racism in our criminal justice system. Tamir Rice, the child was shot within 2 seconds of the police officer arriving. He barely exited the vehicle. This was an officer who had a history of failure in his performance area. The department that he left to go to the Cleveland Police Department said he was unfit for duty, particularly when it relates to firearms. And then in the report that comes out, he thinks he saw Tamir reaching for his waistband when you were notified by at least one caller that it could be a toy gun. Whether it was a toy gun or a real gun, for you to pull right up on a shooter or a potential shooter like that is asinine. But then you fire within 2 seconds. Then the boy's sister shows up and you put her on the ground and in the back of the car before you even administer help to this child. That happens in black communities. Contrast that with the recent shooting of the white young man in Louisiana, 6-year-old boy, tragic. Shouldn't have happened. But the 2 black officers that shot that kid have been indicted quickly. And $1 million bond set for both of them. Freddie Gray. Freddie Gray. He did not leave his home in Baltimore on April 12, 2015 with a broken back and a crushed windpipe. And he didn't do it to himself. But yet, officers would assert that that's the case and become indignant when we don't believe them. Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney for Baltimore, who had the courage and the integrity to indict the officers, was met with the vitriol and aggressive response and the attacks on her and her family by the police union there and the officers there, because I'm telling you, they want zero accountability. Zero, none. That's why this movement that you see growing around you, that's why the unity that you've created amongst you in the communities that you've come from, whether it's a white community, black, Asian, Hispanic, LGBT, whatever religion, that's why the unity that you've built and the movement that you built is so vital to the change that we need to see, because historically, there's been no recognition of the value of black life in this country, period. And it's okay to say Black Lives Matter. Yes, we've had our moments. There have been moments when people of all races have come together and given us some victories, but there's never been in the history of this country, never a consensus nationally, a majority that says, you know what, everyone here should be equally valued in every process that we have. And we all agree to that. There's always been at least half the country, millions of people, more than half sometimes, who would fight that with everything in them. Everything in them. That's the American reality. I'm not talking about the American narrative. I'm talking about the American reality. When it comes to precedent, it's good reason for those officers to be sure that they won't be held accountable, especially when it comes to black life. Trayvon Martin, another kid, stalked, then killed by George Zimmerman, a man from whom what I've seen and heard gives us all a very good example of a textbook coward. All of his fights are with women and children. He engages Trayvon after he's told not to by the real police. He was pretending to be that night and shoots to death a child he physically fought while outweighing him by 100 pounds. Then he gets off under Florida's stand your ground law. Contrast that with Marissa Alexander's case in Florida, a woman who, upon being confronted by a man who had a history of physically and brutally assaulting her, and who in that moment announced to her that he was about to physically and brutally assault her again, she produced a weapon, a gun, and said, "No, you're not. No, you're not." And she fired a shot, a warning shot in Florida, hitting no one, killing no one. And she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The process distorted by race and racism gets us a result like that, and you can believe a lot of people in Florida were good with that, comfortable with it. The last case I want to talk about nationally, there are more, but I know I'm on limited time. Michael Brown. Michael Brown was killed 10 minutes from my house. Killed by Darren Wilson in Ferguson. There were credible witnesses that described the scene of that shooting that contradicted Darren Wilson's account, and it is a case that should have been tried on the facts in front of a jury. But a prosecutor was determined to prevent that and dumped information in front of the grand jury and told them to sort through it, which included the testimony of a hostile witness for whom it had been established as fact that she could not have been and was not physically present at the time Michael was shot. This with a prosecutor who has a history of that kind of thing. 20 years earlier, a notorious shooting on a Jack in the Box parking lot when the Jack in the Box was filled with students from a local school, and the police carried out an operation on that same lot where the students were with 2 suspects, killing them both of them unarmed, one of them a gainfully employed father. That goes to a grand jury, and it's later discovered that to that grand jury and to the public afterward, McCulloch lied about key elements of testimony in the case. Key elements. But he gets this case and does the same thing with it, and Darren Wilson at the scene was allowed to leave and get his story straight. Much was made about what Michael Brown may or may not have been doing earlier that day. Was there a strong-arm robbery? Is he a thug? Is he a hoodlum? Black criminality and the criminalization of black victims is common in this country. But again, that goes specifically to the race of the person involved. We don't always handle youthful, poor choices that way. I was randomly on the web the other day and I came across something about an actor named Mark Wahlberg. Anybody know who Mark Wahlberg is? Show of hands. Anybody? Famous guy, well-paid, millionaire. When Mark was a kid like Michael Brown, he brutally assaulted 2 men, one of whom he knocked unconscious while shouting racist taunts at him. His name was Alum, Vietnamese guy. Another man he beat so brutally that he permanently blinded him in one eye. His name was Hoa Trinh. On the tape that they showed me of Mike, he shoved somebody. If that's Mike on the tape, he shoved somebody. But you had officers and officials, elected people saying, that's enough. His death is warranted because look at the kind of kid he was. He pushed that guy. Good thing we gave Mark Wahlberg a chance to get his life. It's a good thing we saw that he was redeemable. And what about black on black crime? What about it? While I'm here, people say or ask, where are the protests when blacks kill other blacks? As if that's an offset for the human rights violations, civil rights violations, and brutality we see from people who are sworn to protect and serve us and who are empowered to act on us by law. First, people commit crimes where they are against the people around them, where you live. So there's black on black crime, white on white crime, Hispanic on Hispanic crime. It's crime. A better question is, where is the coverage of the many protests and organized efforts to address violence in black communities that take place all the time in St. Louis? I've been a part of many of them, and many of my colleagues are invested in ongoing, continuous, decades-long efforts to push back against the kinds of things that we see that contribute to the violence in our communities and directly address it at the community level, at the grassroots level, some cases door to door. What we have not been able to do is slow the defunding of already under-resourced public education, slow chronic underemployment, or slow the mass incarceration that results from the inequities legislated into our laws and the target enforcement that follows it. We haven't been able to do that. Deprivation and hopelessness, you put those together anywhere and you'll get what you get, whether that's in Vladivostok, St. Petersburg, Russia, Warsaw, Poland, St. Louis, Missouri, the Bahamas, wherever you create those conditions, you will have what you have. It's not mysterious, but it's not only the violence that we talk about when we address it in our communities, and I think it's important to talk about this because what it comes down to for us is the lost futures. When you talk about young people losing their lives, we lost that future. What might he or she have been? What might he or she have given to us? What have we lost? A future. But I'll tell you this and be clear. Yes, violence in our communities is a problem, and I'll tell you specifically the problem I have with it in a minute. but the number of futures lost to violence in our communities doesn't begin to approach the number of futures lost in our communities to a criminal justice system that is at its core institutionally racist and works in concert with a private prison industry that trades publicly on the stock market and insists through its legislative lobby that states ensure the prisons they contract to build and run for profit remain 90% occupied. I'll say this about the issue. The specific problem that I have with it, and this is just me personally. It pains me that our young people, descendants of the community that has been targeted for suffering and abuse, marginalization and deprivation, enslaved, exploited, diminished at every turn, would now turn the gun on us and each other. That part of it pains me. I look at what's happening in Chicago, I look at what's happening in St. Louis and other cities, and I pray for a raised consciousness in those communities, among those young people, to get a clearer picture of who they are and where they are and how we got where we are. Moreover, I would call out our entertainers, the ones who profit from the death of our brothers, who move a message in our community that the death of your brother is your mission in life. And if that's not your mission, you ain't about nothing with us. And who profit from sending that poison to us, and who see the blood spilling in our streets and glorify and encourage it further, when your right to your freedom of expression and to keep it real was bought and paid for with the blood and sacrifice of the people who came before you. Get conscious, man. Get conscious. Wake up. Stop allowing yourself to be used by a system that has destroyed us since we landed. None of that, none of it changes the fact that institutional racism is at the foundation of criminal justice in America and is also a feature of police culture throughout the nation. Too many examples to list and too short a time to do it, maybe in the question and answer. But nothing we can talk about changes it. Not new terrorist threats, not looting, nothing can change the reality of the problems and issues that we have to come to grips with as a country to move forward. You can't sweep it under the rug. You can't say, hey, look over there. None of that. Equal treatment under the law is an American narrative, not the American reality. And we're going to have to dig deep within ourselves. And I'll tell you this, to make the discussion more comfortable, and let me say this, and not just in this room, but nationally, for the nation. Here's how to make this racial discussion, and we talk about black and white, but we have other races in this country too. Black and white, though. Here's how to make that discussion more comfortable. Understand this, accept it, and we can go forward. The problems I'm talking about here tonight, and that I talk about in all the places that I discuss them, when it comes to race and racism and institutional racism and our history with it, no one in this auditorium tonight is under indictment. The white people in the room is under indictment for any of this. Why? Because you didn't create the conditions. We were all born into this reality. It was like this when we got here. This is what we were born into, man. You didn't do this. Trust me, it was like this when you showed up. If you're alive now, our responsibility is to acknowledge fully what that reality is, not the narrative. The reality of our history is and where it has us now, and then do something about it collectively together. That's our role. That's what will allow us to have this discussion. And as I prepare to close, because I was told I only had 30 minutes, and I know I'm getting there are things that we can do to change the dynamic between police and communities that they serve, the police-community relationship and the breakdown in it was the genesis of the movement that we see. Of course, it has expanded now to include discussions of race and its impact across all our systems, whether you're talking about education, employment, healthcare, you name it. But relative to police and community, the first and foremost piece that we have to address is accountability. Accountability. There's already plenty of good training. I heard people talk about this training, that new training, that we've got great training already that officers receive, but it's worthless if you don't have officers that adhere to the policy and who aren't held accountable when they don't. Eric Garner, murdered while officers violated their own policies to take his life, and nobody is held accountable. All we get is Pat Lynch with his chin up and his chest out, looking like a doofus. Accountability is everything, and it starts from inside the system. One of the things that I would like to see in NCLEOJ, the National Coalition of Law Enforcement Officers for Justice, Reform, and Accountability, which is a diverse group of current and former officers from coast to coast, LA to New York. One of the things I would like to see us become involved in is building a movement within the criminal justice system itself, nationally, starting with people who come from affected communities, Black and brown communities, who work in the criminal justice system, judges, attorneys, police officers, corrections officers, whoever you are and wherever you are in that system. We can collect ourselves within that system and demand and force the changes we want to see relative to how it operates in our communities and its function in our community. There are enough of us, and it's right. We have the moral high ground here, man. That's one of the things that I would like to see. Another thing that I think would go a long way toward resolving some of the issues we've seen is a special prosecutor in all cases involving use of force by a police officer resulting in serious injury or death. The relationship between prosecutors and police departments are too close to have a reasonable expectation that the prosecutor is going after any officer in that department that they work in alliance with almost 100% of the time. Bob McCulloch is a prime example of that. He was recently sued after Mike Brown's case, recently sued in the last month or two by a grand juror that he illegally removed from the grand jury because he thought he had a propensity to look at things differently. He's a former ACLU attorney. I think I know who he is. They haven't announced his name publicly. He's John Doe, but I'm pretty sure I know who he is. Bob McCulloch takes him off the grand jury in violation of state law. You think they don't shape outcomes? You think they don't decide who gets justice and who doesn't? Which leads me to my next point. In cases involving police misconduct or use of police force that result in serious injury or death, eliminate the grand jury. Yes, eliminate the grand jury. It's a secretive process that in too many cases involving police misconduct result in the elimination of accountability for police officers because the prosecutor has advocated for the officer in front of the grand jury, so they didn't want to have to be tried on the facts. Either that or have the arguments for indictment take place where the public can be present. And the last thing I would tell you is to support the movement that you see. It's an American movement. Don't be afraid of Black Lives Matter. These are young people who are American citizens just like you, but they want their rights recognized and their right to live and their right to dignity recognized. And it's not negotiable for them. It's not up for really discussion. They're citizens here too, and they fully understand the history. So, as I close my remarks, I'm first of all amazed that I was able to get through them. I thought I was out on my feet when I walked in this room. They ran me ragged today, I'm telling you. I had no idea what I was in for when I got up at 4:30 this morning. to fly to Delaware. But I'm glad I came, and I appreciate you giving me your time and valuing what you thought I might have to say enough to be here tonight. And I look forward to engaging you. I don't think, she said, you know, the questions need to be respectful, and they do, but nothing is off limits. You can challenge me, or you can ask me, or you can say, because I believe in free and open dialogue, I think that's the way forward. And thank you for your patience with me tonight. Thank you. Was that too long?
No, you're fine. Thank you so much for being here. You know, you're the final speaker in this series that we've had all semester long about race in America. We've talked about the Black Lives Matter movement. We've talked about the Civil Rights movement. So you're here kind of in this unique role as having served as a police officer and now kind of speaking out against the uncivil things that you saw. What, as the co-founder of the National Coalition of Law Enforcement for Justice, Reform, and Accountability, a long name you accounted for, how did you go from being a police officer to seeking to hold those same officers accountable?
It wasn't a huge transition. When I came to the department, I came with the same ideology, the same personal philosophy, the same disposition. Everything about me was the same when I joined the department. I think ultimately that's what led to me leaving that work, because I am who I am. I was profoundly disillusioned, though, more than I was before I became a police officer. I became profoundly disillusioned with the criminal justice system in the United States and the conduct of some of my colleagues in particular. And I knew I had to stop being a part of that system. Now, let me be clear about this, because I realize I haven't said this tonight, and I think it's important that I do. There are good police officers. There are good police officers. There are good people doing a very difficult job under very difficult circumstances who have to make very difficult decisions sometimes. And they deserve our support, because it is a tough job. My contention is that the number of officers that will willfully abuse their authority and your human rights and your civil rights is too big a number to not have a systemic policy response in place to deal with those people. But there are good officers in the country.
So I'm going to pull up, this is going to work here, great. So you've had a couple of op-eds or editorials that have come out in the past year talking about your experiences as a police officer. And I'd recommend people looking up these two articles from the Washington Post and Vox. So my students, Brandon in particular, said you spoke about this, the story you spoke about, the young black man with the crutches, was frustrating and upsetting to read about. Were there other situations you've encountered like that during your time with the police force?
No. There's situations that I've encountered, there's situations that I've been made aware of. It's a very common experience to see people's rights abused for little and no reason at all, for simple acts of non-compliance. Yes, I'm aware, for example, of a colleague, and it's very interesting because him and I initially were probably, I wouldn't say we were adversaries, but we were not necessarily best buddies. His father was a chief of police at one point for the St. Louis City Police Department, and then his dad got into politics opposite a guy who was the first African-American mayor in the history of St. Louis that I worked on his security detail. His name was Freeman Bosley Jr., and I was on his security detail. I'm telling you, I used to be in shape, man. I'm telling you. But this guy, while he was on the department, he was in the bureau, detective bureau. And he walked in, he was a sergeant on the detective bureau, and he walked in on one of his officers who was threatening a black subject in a chair with a taser held at his genitals, telling him that he was going to tell him what he wanted to know and what he wanted to hear. He was going to say what he wanted him to say, or else. And my colleague walked in on that and he stopped it, rightfully, and he wrote the guy up, he seized the taser, and immediately, as you would expect, he was ostracized, marginalized. The guy who stopped it, the sergeant, blackballed, we don't deal with you. At the board trial for this thing, I was the only person who showed up, him and his dad, ironically, only two people who showed up in support of him. Every other officer from the union and everywhere else was aligned against him. How dare he stop him from threatening this suspect and ruin his good name? So incidents like that, I'm telling you, I can't impress upon you enough. These are not isolated, few and far between kinds of things. These things are part of the daily lived experience and the collective experience of Black people all over this country.
So 15 years out of your experience in the St. Louis Police Department, I've got a picture up here from demonstrators who are reacting after learning that the police officer who shot Michael Brown would not face charges outside of the police station in Ferguson, Missouri. This is just about a year ago, on November 24th. 15 years out of being out of the police force, what was your reaction when you heard that Officer Darren Wilson would not be charged for Michael Brown's death?
Disappointed and not surprised. I knew whose hands the case was in. Robert McCulloch was doing everything he can. To anyone who understands any part of the legal process when it comes to grand juries and indictments, it was clear early on that he was going to do everything he could to avoid holding Darren Wilson accountable, and I wasn't surprised by it. Nor was I surprised by the reaction of the community. Let me share something with you just to give you a sense of the community. When you see those young people turn up, here's what they've lived. Here's what their parents have lived. I gave a Know Your Rights workshop about 4 months ago in St. Louis, during which at the end of it, a gentleman, mid-50s, early 60s, stood up and said, you know what? When I was coming up, man, as a young man, a police officer saw me moving furniture out of an apartment and came to question me about it. Maybe he was stealing it, maybe he was taking it, but no, he was moving from one apartment to another apartment. He explained to that officer, who was a white officer, that I'm moving, man, I'm gonna move to this apartment, from this apartment, because I'm taking my stuff out. Later that same day, in the evening, at night, that same officer had him face down in the mud with a shotgun at his head, accusing him of stealing and saying that he was taking things from an apartment. Same officer. That took place 30 years ago in Canfield Green, where Mike Brown lived. 30 years ago. So imagine the accumulated experience in history of the people in that community. And then when they see, as I told you, we had credible witnesses that contradicted Darren's story, which he got together. And it was never sent to trial, and nobody ever got a chance to hear the credible testimony against the version of facts that Darren Wilson presented. And even if you accept his version, as an officer, if I'm using deadly force against you because I feel threatened or you are a threat to me, why did you fire any shots at Michael Brown while he was running away from you? If I'm moving away, am I a threat to you now? Am I threatening you? Am I a threat? I'm not. Why are you firing at me? And you don't think he had a weapon because your statement was that he was wrestling and fighting with you over yours. And you retained it. You kept it. He didn't get it, so he has nothing. It should have went to trial.
Well, in addition to your work with looking at police behavior, you've also done some research on human rights abuses in particularly the St. Louis city jails.
Yes.
With the ACLU. You released this report, Suffering in Silence. It's available online in 2009. It demonstrated numerous human rights abuses in St. Louis city jails. What has changed since then?
Not much. Initially, the city was in complete and utter denial. We were told that we had some agenda, and none of that was true, and ultimately, everything that we alleged in the report was proven to be true, and then some. They're facing a number of lawsuits now based on the kinds of conduct and behavior we describe in the report, but systemic change is very difficult. You have to have people inside the system who A, acknowledge the problem, and then B, work to change it, and we haven't seen that, and they are facing lawsuits as we speak. Now they're trying, from what I understand, in recent months to make some changes inside the system, but it's very difficult. I mean, the prison system in America is what it is. Rampant abuse, rampant human rights abuse. We as a society, even if we don't believe it, we tacitly accept the idea, at least, that the moment you cross the threshold of a jail or a prison, your constitutional rights are suspended, which is particularly ironic in jail settings where you're being, in many cases, held over for trial. Innocent until proven guilty still, but they're violating your human rights on a daily basis. I'm talking about brutal beatings, sexual assaults, medical deprivation, which can be deadly. If you have medication and you're incarcerated that you need to live and survive and it's being denied to you, that's a problem. And we found all of those things when we did that report, and I'm glad we were able to shed some light on it, but I know that is widespread.
It's going to take more work?
It's going to take more work, and it's going to take a commitment of us collectively to come to a place where we understand the value of living up to our stated ideals.
I think one of the common questions I had from my students, as part of this series, there's a class associated with this, and my 25 students ask questions, they do research on the speakers, and many of them are concerned and interested about these body cameras. So both Tia and Tony are asking, are body cameras an efficient solution? Is there something else that should be done to hold police officers accountable?
Yeah. I think body cameras are a great part of solving the issues that we have with police abuse. The issue is accountability, of course. Now, with those body cameras, you can rest assured that there's going to be a fight all the way through that process to the point where we see how they're uniformly and consistently used by the majority of police departments or all departments, because many departments right now are, on one hand, accepting the idea that, okay, these body cameras are a good idea, they provide us an objective record, but at the same time, they're trying to limit the public's access to the footage that the body camera produces. Or they want to hold it for 14 days or 21 days before it's released. Well, that's ridiculous. And I don't think there's enough trust in this relationship for anybody to be comfortable with the idea of a police department having sole access and custody of video footage that's gained from an officer's conduct who may be under investigation for some potentially criminal act, for you guys to be the ones who hold it. It's the fox guarding the hen house. Additionally, though, I think empowered civilian review oversight is something that should be in play, although I haven't seen very many models nationally that I would describe as wildly successful, usually because they lack the kind of authority and autonomy that would make them effective in the role of oversight of a police department. And the go-to argument there for police departments is that, civilians don't understand what we do. And you don't understand our process and procedure, you don't know what it's like to make a split-second decision, and on and on and on. But don't ever discount common sense and the value of explanation. If you can tell me why you did what you did, and I can look at what you did, I can still make a pretty good decision about what side of right or wrong and legal and illegal you landed on.
So I want to hand over the questions to our audience in just a minute here, but we had a pretty exciting day here on campus. We have a new president of the university as of today.
I heard.
We also...
Is he here?
I think they're doing other events.
He couldn't come to this?
But today, in addition to all the pomp and circumstance surrounding our new president, students at UD and other campuses had and I've got it up here, the National Collegiate Blackout, standing in solidarity with students of color, an incident largely motivated by recent events at the University of Missouri, not far from where you live. So you live in Missouri. What's happening on that campus? What's the history of race and racism on that campus? And how can students at University of Delaware and across the country work to make a difference on their own campuses?
It's a long history in Missouri. When that first kicked off, people in my generation. I'm 51 years old, and there were people that I know who attended the university, people who were older than them who attended, and they were all on our Facebook feed talking about what happened when they were there and how it lined up, exactly with what's going on now. Nothing has changed. And so everybody was collectively very proud of what the young people at the University of Missouri were able to do under these circumstances. And we think it has implications broadly, nationally, because the issue isn't only at the University of Missouri. There's no state university in the country that I think doesn't face that kind of issue on some level from coast to coast. And I think what students can do is what they're doing already, which is get involved. And you see, I think, a beautiful synthesis of like-minded students from all backgrounds. Yes, it's black students, but it's white students, it's Asian students, Hispanic students. You have international students coming together to say that, you know what, we want a world and we want a country where we are all equally valued and equally respected, our dignity, our lives, our futures, and we're going to work together to create that in spite of this nation's history and in spite of the powers in place who would fight against these young people to sustain the systems that have put us in the position that we're in now.
So before I hand it over to audience questions, I think we're going to get some microphones set up so people can ask questions. But do you have any strategies in mind that could kick off these changes to better change the justice system? This comes from Emily. She says, you mentioned ways that you believe you could change these institutional practices in police departments. What are some real practical things that can happen now?
There are two. There are two, and because I don't believe in big, broad, programs, but there's two, and they dovetail nicely. The one is on me and us and those who are in the system. I'm a firm believer in the fact that a significant part of the change that we want to see has to come from inside the system. The people in the system have the most immediate opportunity and the most immediate power to really force change in it. The second thing is to add that effort to the already existing movement that's on the ground from coast to coast, to work together with folks everywhere. Black Lives Matter, any other positive movement that's moving in the direction for change, positive change and positive reform, to work in coalition with those organizations for the changes that we want to see. And with that pressure coming from the outside and a critical mass of people inside the system willing to have the same commitment to change, I think we can see it happen, and I think the climate in the country is right for it here. It's not lost on anybody. It's not lost on anybody that the demographics in the country are changing. And I think, unfortunately, many of the worst opponents of equal treatment under the law and equal access to opportunity or the people who would fight hardest against the kinds of changes we want to see. There is no coincidence, none. It's not a coincidence that when Barack Obama was elected president, the covers came off. The covers came off, come on. As soon as he was elected president, we saw what this nation is about in pockets. And we saw a growing number of vocal racists who are vehemently opposed to black progress and black leadership. But we don't have to succumb to that. We don't have to give in to that, because collectively, at the end of the day, we're all Americans. And we all, I think, want what's best for our communities and our families and our country. And together we can move in that direction, but it has to be premised on the idea that equal treatment under the law has to become a reality and not just a narrative.
Well, thank you so much for answering my question so honestly in this personal narrative you've offered. I'm sure that our audience has lots of good questions. We actually tonight have microphones, so on either side of the auditorium here, we're opening it up for questions. So if you raise your hand, some of our two students, Abby and Christy, can come down and hand you the microphone if you have a question for our speaker.
Did I do a really good job?
He answered all of your
Don't answer that. Don't. I set myself up for the abuse when I ask that question.
All right, down here in the front.
And here comes the abuse.
You talked about making the conversation between police, non-police, white, black, comfortable.
Yeah. I hear him. Oh, you all can't hear him. Oh, okay.
Talk about making the conversation comfortable. Should it be comfortable? I think I'm just stating, and it's going to be a question that you can respond to or a statement you can respond to. I think we need to feel that uncomfortableness so that we can then understand, because people can understand without some kind of vulnerability, some kind of uncomfortableness.
I think your point is well made. And actually, I agree with you. I maybe should have had a different choice of words. Rather than comfortable, I should have said accessible. The way to get us into the space where we can be a little uncomfortable is to understand that at the bottom of it, nobody is under indictment. Nobody is not going to be guilty and innocent in the sense of people who are present and who are willing to work for change. So yeah, there's going to be some discomfort. It's unavoidable because of who we are as a country. And when I say that, I'm going to go ahead and share this. Well, I'll save that for the end. There's a story I tell, and it's, I'm sure to be vilified, but it's true. Hell, I'll go ahead and tell it now in 3 minutes. My dad died in '96, and my mom got remarried about 4 years later. Nice guy. I was real happy for her. She seemed happy. I would go by their home, and the guy she married, his name is Joseph Jones, was an avid reader. He reads all kinds of books, and he had a book on his table that I just happened to pick up, and it was called The Black Press, as in media, press, media, the black press, and it was about the black press in America from about the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. Now, first of all, I was floored. I didn't really realize we had a black press at that point in our nation's history. I just, and to see, you can imagine the kinds of things that they were writing about, and they were all very intelligently written articles, coherent, just brilliant. I'm thinking, man, wow. But I came across one. When I say that the conditions we're trying to address pre-exist us, I came across one article. It was a response from an editor of one of these black newspapers to a speech that he'd heard, a speech. This speech was given by a white man, who belonged to the American Colonization Society. And that American Colonization Society advocated for the repatriation of African Americans back to Africa. They say they don't belong here. We don't need them here. They can't make it here. We want them out of here. They should go home. Let's put together an effort, especially free blacks. Got to get out of the country. And in this speech, what the editor of the paper angrily responded to in his response, the rage was coming off the page, was this comment. And I'm going to do the research because I talk about it so much that I'm sure to be challenged on it. The book exists. I can produce that. But I haven't been able to be clear about whether he was directly quoting this guy or if he was paraphrasing this guy. But either way, the words on the page were these, to the effect that blacks need to get out of this country. We need them out of here because this country, America, the United States, will never treat them equally and value them equally. Not God, nor conscience, nor religion, nor the Bible could make it so. Let that sink in. Not God, religion, the Bible, not conscience, the things that animate human conduct, behavior, and life. None of these things can make this country, he believed, treat blacks as anything other than they've always been treated. Who was he either quoting or paraphrasing? Francis Scott key. The man who wrote your national anthem. That's what he believed. So when I say we were born into this reality, I mean it. And when I say that we have a real opportunity to bring substantive moral change to the nation, I believe it. And we can do that. But we have to acknowledge the reality of who we are and where we've come from, and not just the narrative.
Before I open it up to an audience question, we've got a question from Twitter, as well as from some of my students, Jordan and Brooke and Parker from Twitter. Basically, you mentioned in several articles that racial sensitivity classes aren't enough to help stop police brutality. What are some other tactics you recommend for either preventing that or repercussions for officers when they violate?
The only one that works is punishment. The only thing that will get us to where we need to be when it comes to that is actual punishment for misconduct or violation of the rights of the citizens you serve. Everything else is going to fall short until we see officers incarcerated for their violations, for their criminal acts. That's it. Because many officers can be dismissed from a department for misconduct, but only to be hired by the department in the next municipality over or one state over. Only punishment when it comes to affecting change in behavior, the behavior of officers that we see abuse their authority. That's it. It's the bottom line.
Okay, let's open it up to the audience for another question. Raise your hand if there's a question over here. Christy?
Hi, okay. I was just wondering, as a student, like I'm personally studying public policy, and this is something very interesting to me. What can we do to solve this? Like, what action do you say even a normal person could take, or even someone who wants to go into public service could do in order to help resolve this issue?
First and foremost, keep your foot on the gas. Keep doing what you all are already doing. You're organizing, you're mobilizing, you're taking actions across the country. Don't stop. Don't give up. Don't slow down. And then as you advance in your career or on your career path, and you leave the university, keep your ideals with you and get yourself in a position, in some public policy position, to affect public policy change and be the same strong advocate in the public arena after you leave here as you are right now.
And this is a question our students often have, is sort of what can they do? Where can they go from here?
Well, it's pretty much what I just told her. What you do is keep doing what you're doing. You're having the Ferguson effect, which again, is spurious from the standpoint that somehow the idea that you would watch an officer do his job prevents him from doing his job. What an indictment of the system that really is. When you let that sink in, what they're telling you is that if you watch me, I can't work. That's ridiculous. But you're having an impact on the national discussion, on the national agenda, which in turn is at some point going to affect policy ultimately. You're having an impact. So continue to maintain your enthusiasm and your energy and your clarity and your conscience, and do the work that you do as you develop yourselves individually, and keep building the relationships that you're building. Keep showing us how to build unity and bridges across the spectrum of people that come into contact with you.
And I study technology and the impact of technology on politics, and I think that particularly surrounding this issue, we've seen people using cell phones and smartphones to capture incidents like a few weeks ago, a viral video showing a resource officer at a South Carolina high school slamming a student to the ground, tossing her several feet across the floor. I was telling you earlier, what rattled me most about that video was that none of the other students even reacted to this. This was a normal reality for them. The officer has since been fired, but what can be done in schools to reduce this type of behavior?
Well, first we need to remove these officers from the schools, period. As part of that school to prison pipeline, we never had law enforcement officers in our schools to resolve what should be issues that are resolved at the school level. When I saw that videotape, I was appalled, absolutely appalled. And I was even more appalled. You talk about the students not reacting. I was even more appalled by the African-American administrators that said it was all right. That said it was all right. I'm good with what I just saw happen. You must be crazy. For him to walk in and assault that child like that was beyond the pale, totally unnecessary, and it's unjustifiable, and he should have been fired. And it's that kind of action that I think reflects exactly why you hear these young, I'm harping on it tonight, I didn't realize I was going to, but it's exactly why you hear the young people say Black Lives Matter. Had that been a white 16-year-old girl, let me tell you something, man. He wouldn't have touched her like that. He wouldn't have grabbed her by her throat, slammed her to the floor, and threw her across the classroom. He wouldn't have done it. But he thought he could do it in that setting with that child, and that's a problem. And it goes to accountability. I'm glad to see him gone, and I hope that he's out of law enforcement altogether, if that's going to be his approach to the children in my community.
Well, and I know we'll have more questions from the audience. I'll hopefully wrap up my questions with this one. But in Delaware, speaking of youth, as in many other states, there's no minimum age for a child to be charged as an adult. This varies by state, but in a recent report from Al Jazeera America, Black youth are overrepresented among those arrested, detained, and admitted to state prisons. The suicide and sexual abuse rates of young prisoners are much higher than older prisoners. How should states and prisons be treating youth as compared to adults? Like
youth, and understand that even their brains are different. There's so much research in the area. You wouldn't want to be held accountable, or I wouldn't want to be held accountable for a decision that I made at 12 or 13 or 14 years old for the rest of my life. I do understand accountability and responsibility, and there are serious crimes that are committed by young kids that they need to be held accountable for. But to deprive them of the opportunity of redemption, of ever having the opportunity to give something back from those they've taken away from, to become a productive member in our society, that's not who we really are. And luckily, all of us should understand that. I would venture to guess there's not a person in this room. I'm not looking at a room full of angels. Huh? No, sir, and no, ma'am. I'm under no illusion that anybody in this room, including myself, could easily have been caught up and may have done some things that you got away with, whatever. But here you are now at this stage in your life, and this is the person that you are, fully positioned and fully prepared to do something positive and great. I think that opportunity should be afforded to everyone after we've held them accountable and responsible for the things they do. But particularly the younger you are, and particularly for like drug-related offenses and things like that, errors in judgment more than anything, we need to understand that, you know, our youth are our youth and treat them differently than we do adults in our system.
Okay, let's take another question from the audience. Down here in the front. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Talking about accountability, I go back to Watts, I go back to Detroit, the fires in '67. I look at Sharpton and what was her name? Harley?
Who? I know Sharpton.
Yeah, he had the rally when it was found out that it was incorrect, that she never got raped.
The little girl.
Yes.
Brawley,
okay. And then also looking at Duke in the lacrosse. Where's the accountability from that side, and for you not to speak any to issues on that side? You were strictly talking about police matters, but not the other side. Why are you not standing up and questioning some of the people on the other side?
Okay, so when people are falsely accused of a crime that is race.
That's always wrong. But to answer your question, because I came here tonight to talk about what I'm talking about, I came here tonight to talk about police community issues. I didn't come to talk about Sharpton and Tawana Brawley or the Duke lacrosse team or any of that. I came specifically to talk about what I'm talking about. However, what we are talking about is equal treatment under the law and people being equally valued and treated equally in the process. When it was discovered that those Duke lacrosse players were falsely accused, they were exonerated, and the woman was, I think, held to some account, I don't know for sure, for what she had done. But there are instances of people exploiting situations. Sharpton has been accused of that. This young lady obviously was clearly guilty of that. But the weight of the instances that you and I could name that involve black people wronging whites in the public sphere or defaming or discrediting whites in the public sphere, I think, personally, pales in comparison to the number of blacks who have been targeted and minorities and poor people who have been targeted and injured by a system that's been in place since the country's genesis and has persisted to this very moment. And me and you sit here and talk, I just don't see it's apples and oranges. But Sharpton was wrong for his false presentation of those facts, and the young lady was wrong, and I'm glad those Duke players were exonerated.
Okay, another question from the audience. How about here? You've got a green shirt on, bright green shirt.
So, considering like the events in the past week with Paris and refugees and all those issues going on, President Obama has made multiple statements regarding them, but yet the one thing that became a trending topic or I guess popular on social media was that he said "pop off" in one of his speeches. Do you think that the media is just perpetuating these stereotypes by concentrating on like the quote unquote black things that these politicians do and not the politics that they stand for?
Probably yes, but that's the national media. They I think people are now sophisticated enough, the majority of people, to know that the mainstream American media is not necessarily the best primary source of information that you can have. And I think people take what they present to us at face value. We glean from it what we will, and we look for other sources of information to give us a more complete picture of whatever the issue is we're looking into. But the media and this president have had that kind of relationship for some time, particularly certain media outlets that would vilify him at every turn. Now, having said that, I'm not always in 100% agreement with the president on some of the things that he says and does. I think that's a myth, that blacks just, no matter what, we are rolling with President Obama. Yes, we support him, I support him, and I'm proud of the terms that he's had, but there have been issues with which I would substantively disagree with the positions that he's taken. So the media is going to do what the media does. They have to generate viewership, and a lot of times that's red meat for some of their viewers.
I think we had one more question on this side. Yeah, right back there.
I'm going to stand if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
I'm standing because I want you to see who I am. This past Saturday, we had a conference here at the Chase Center, and it's one of our auditoriums downtown. There were about 500 people there. It was about a 40-60 mix of black and white, and it really is and was all about this issue. I say is because that was the opening event of things to come. So I'm kind of sort of offering the group here, the young people who are asking what can they do, they can join that movement, which is here in the Delaware area. There are a lot of things going on, and I'm going to get to a question.
Take your time. I'm tired, man. Take as long as you need.
No, we've got only a few minutes left, so
right,
definitely get to the question soon.
I'm going to ask the question first, and then I'll ask it again. I'm a few years older than you, probably about 30. I probably have a daughter your age.
Man,
But
say we don't crack.
the kind of question is really, where do we go from here? Are we undertaking an impossible task? You went back in history. My mother worked this issue until she was 92. I don't know that she ever learned to like white people during that period, but she worked with them in an effort to try to change the world. She did shut down a number of drugstores that wouldn't serve black people. So anyway, there's a lot of history in my life that keeps me at it. And as I look at my grandchildren, particularly my grandson, and all the issues of police and the police issues that they have. So anyway, I've been through a lot of those areas. Is there a solution? Is it just a matter of staying with it and working at it? And you mentioned that there was never a time, that there was a pleasant time between the races in the country. So will there ever be?
If I'll build off this question, thank you so much. It almost sounds like, is there hope? Are we fighting a losing battle? Are people of color fighting a losing battle?
Thank you.
Well, my answer to that question is yes, there is hope. And yes, I believe that we are in a position to see that evolve, that condition of a better relationship between the people who live in this country of the different races come into place, not due in no small part to the fact that the demographics of the country are changing. And in about 30 or 40 years, brown people will be the majority in this country. Now, that's not anything to be afraid of, because what you'll find is that people are people. And it's not going to be about, using those numbers to now turn the tables and seek vengeance and we're going to get you back for all of it. No, I don't believe that. I think the generation that's in front of us has a greater focus on human rights and equality than many preceding generations, notwithstanding the civil rights movement and all the great work that was done by whites and blacks and people of all races in that movement. But I think right now we see a confluence of changing numbers in our country racially and changing ideas and motivation and energy of the very people who are part of the changing numbers. So I think that there's an opportunity, if we seize it, if we have enough courage to acknowledge the reality of the country and what it's been and what we want to be, and then do the work of getting to that place, I believe it can happen. I feel like I have to believe that because I got kids too.
Before I formally thank you for coming, I want to thank everyone here in the audience for being here. This has been a really important semester in talking about race, not just in America, but on this campus. And I really want to, as director of this series, continue the dialogue online, on Twitter, and in other forums. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you want to talk more about this. lindsayh@udel.edu, at UD Race in America on Twitter. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Redditt, for joining us for our final.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.